Well, welcome to Tim's Take. And today we have a new guest, but very familiar guest is Dr. Jordan Thomas. He's in the animal science assistant professor in cattle repro. Welcome, Jordan. And we're going to talk a little bit about managing repro and life in cattle during this drought and lots of other topics.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, what's going on right now since the last time we talked to you?
Well,
on a cold day in March.
That's right. It was a cold day in March, and we had a lot more moisture at the time as well.
Yes.
It's been an interesting year, I think, for raised beef cattle in Missouri. You think about the last 12 months, we had a pretty dry fall in 2022, and so we didn't really grow a lot of what we would generally think of as fall stockpiled forage to carry us into the winter. So a lot of hay got used up pretty rapidly in Missouri, and then we went into probably a pretty standard spring, but it got really dry really fast,
right.
And we just have not had really much in the way of spring yield in terms of forage. So a lot less hay has been made across the state. I'm not a big hay fan anyway. We can get into that, but a lot less hay has been made than normal, and certainly a lot less forage quantity out there available for grazing.
How's quality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Eric Bailey in our division is probably a better resource on some of these types of questions as a nutritionist, or maybe folks like Dr. Harley Nauman as well. We got a state grazing specialist in him now in our division of animal science, so we got a really strong team. But at least from my perspective, as some of the mostly focuses on repro, but tries to think about it in systems-y kinds of ways. Drought years are not necessarily all that bad for individual animal performance. A lot of times we'll talk about the forage having some punch to it, which is it's kind of low in its moisture content. The cattle can go eat a lot of it, but the quality necessarily isn't what we're as concerned about. But gosh, we're concerned about quantity because there's just less available to carry livestock. So the problem we often get into is, if you don't reduce herd numbers in response to that reduction in quantity, then we start impacting the individual animal performance because there's just not enough quantity out there available, and we don't get animals actually taking in what they need to.
And like we were talking to Eric last time, we're facing that this winter, not having a lot, and we're not getting the rains yet, so we won't have the stockpile, so we're getting a lot of that. So is this a good opportunity then to let's really look at our breeding herd? Maybe we can make some selections now or some culls.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's what we should probably dig into today, just in terms of this episode. But that's the way that I think routinely. It's just that it really gets a magnifying glass put on it in a drought year, right? Because you have to. It's an imperative in that year. But really, the way that we ought to think about beef cows every year is trying to strategically divest out of our low profitability type of animals and then redeploy that equity back into a more highly profitable animal. And so a drought year gives you a great opportunity to do that. You just maybe don't do that redeployment of the equity right away because you don't have the carrying capacity to do that. But that's exactly the way I think about it. Droughts are kind of opportunities.
And is that one of the hardest things for cattle producers to do is to cull that herd?
Yeah. Do you want a really long-winded version of this?
We got time. Yeah.
Okay,
let's delve into this.
One of my favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and I give this extension talk. I do less of these nowadays. I more research teaching these days than extension, but I used to do this in extension talks and still do when I talk to producers. He talks about in that book a series of experiments that they did in their research program. He's a behavioral psychologist and really kind of an economist as well. But they took a coffee mug from the university bookstore, and it's worth $9.99 at the bookstore, right? And they took a large college lecture hall. We have several of those at Mizzou, right? And they divided it in thirds. So think about one that's divided into 3 different, alleys or something like that. And a third of the room, they give them all one of these coffee mugs, each one, and they say, "This was $9.99 at the bookstore. It's yours. You get to leave with it. But your assignment is price the mug as if you were going to sell it to somebody else in this class. So what's the price point at which you'd be willing to take cash and not leave with the mug and take cash instead?" So you can imagine it's probably not $9.99. It's something lower than that, but they're price the mug as a seller. Then they take a third of the room, they give them all $10 bills, and they say, this is your $10 bill, you get to leave with it. But if you're interested in one of these mugs, obviously there's going to be some for sale. So your assignment is just tell us what's the maximum amount that you'd be willing to pay for a mug. So you can imagine they're probably not going to pay $10, but there's going to be some price point at which they'd be willing to buy a mug. Maybe it's a penny, maybe it's higher than that. But at some point, there's a price point that they're going to be willing to buy the mug. Then the other third of the room, they say, you just get to choose whether you want to leave with cash or you want to leave with a mug. Just tell us where that tipping point is. So kind of as a choose or price it. So he goes through this experiment and then sets it up where you really kind of have to think about, well, should they all be priced the same or should they not? And what they saw is those three groups do not price the mug the same. The sellers think it's worth, I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but let's say they think it's worth $5. Mm-hmm. And so the people that are holding the mug and they're choosing whether to sell, they want $5 for that mug they already have. And then the people that were given cash, they think maybe the maximum they'd pay for it is about $2. And the same is true for the people that just get to choose. So if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is none of those people come to that lecture hall with a mug. None of them come with that amount of money, and they're going to leave with either the mug or they're going to leave with that amount of money. So same starting point, same ending point. But for whatever reason, one of them thinks it's worth double than the other one does. And the only reason for that is they're already holding this mug in their hands that they believe to be theirs, right? And so it's this phenomenon that in psychology now is called the endowment effect, or in other fields they'll call it mere ownership bias, that the mere ownership of something creates a bias to value it higher than market price, basically. So doesn't that sound like cold cows?
It does. Because you know what you got.
Yeah, exactly. And let's say that I have a cow that at pregnancy diagnosis is preg checking open. She's non-pregnant. Mm-hmm. She's not going to produce a calf, in that production cycle that I've established, whatever that is. Well, that cow is worth whatever an open cow is worth on the market, right? And we probably wouldn't go drive to the auction barn and go buy that same open cow as an open cow today to put it into our production cycle. Let's say we're trying to calve in September and she's not bred in, March. So we know she's not going to calve in September. She's not going to fit our production model. But what we do is, because of the mere ownership bias or the endowment effect, we overvalue her and we say, well, I'm just going to hold on to that cow for another year, right? Or I'm going to turn this fall calving cow into a spring calving cow or something like that. And what it does is it creates in our models a lot of inefficiencies because we tolerate these low productivity cows and we continue to have our equity living in these low gross margin animals, these animals that are producing low gross margins. And that's a big challenge. So with a drought year, you sort of get a spotlight pointed on those because you go, gosh, I don't have the grass to carry 100 cows. I've got the grass to carry 70 cows. 30 cows need to go. Which 30 cows should it be? And it's probably obvious that it should be open cows. Right. But I think we can get even more granular than that, right? And go, well, who are the next cows that need to go? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how many cycles can a cow miss before you say she's done for the...
Yeah, there's probably not a one-size-fits-all answer. Uh-huh. But let's say that, my goal is to have 2/3 of the cows roughly conceiving in the first cycle. And then maybe I've got another 20% or so conceiving in the next cycle and 10% conceiving in the cycle after that or something like that.
That's 3 months.
Yeah, well, a cycle in cattle is 3 weeks, so it ends up being about 60 days, so closer to 2 months. But so let's say you think about that situation. Well, even in that situation, that's a 2-month calving season. That seems somewhat short, right? Mm-hmm. But that cow that conceived on the first day will have a calf that at weaning is, the oldest calf in the group, and therefore it's going to be the heaviest calf in the group. A calf will gain about 2 pounds a day from birth to weaning on average. So every day of existence is about 2 pounds. So that cow that conceived to calve on day 60 of the calving season, she's going to wean a calf that's 60 days younger, therefore about 120 pounds lighter just because of its age. Right. And then, so you think about, what's the current calf price, right? So I think calves today are selling at $2.50 to $3 a pound in that kind of range. And so That's not exactly how it would work because there's a little bit of a price slide. But if you've got a 120-pound difference between calves, there's a substantial dollar amount difference in today's prices in terms of just how much revenue that cow is going to bring in the next production cycle. Yeah.
Or unless you just hold them longer.
Well, but not really, right? Because you incur costs every time we hold calves on the operation. It also creates a lot of inefficiencies for us if we've got all this spread in calf age, and we're bringing certain calves to the auction at certain time points and other calves to the auction at different time points. We're weaning calves at different ages. We've got multiple groups to manage. It's a cluster.
I can see that.
It can get out of control in a hurry. So we really are trying to manage at the herd level for a lot of uniformity in calving date. We really want to have a short, condensed calving season, partly because of that calf value. So here's the other little wrinkle, though. One is how much revenue that they produce. The other one is, well, how much does it cost, right? And so there are big variable costs of production, or what I call direct costs of production. Cattle is feed, of course, and stuff that the cow eats largely. So mostly that's pasture, stored forage in the form of hay generally for most folks, and then supplementation of some kind. Those are most of the time that's 55% roughly of the direct costs associated with producing a calf is feed the cow eats,
right.
Stuff that goes through the cow. Our next biggest cost of production is this weird one called cow depreciation, which is the loss in the value of the cow herd in that calendar year or that production year. So where that mostly comes from is, let's say that a bred cow is worth, I'm just going to use round numbers to make it easy, she's worth $2,000, and an open cow or a non-pregnant cow is worth $1,000. So there's a $1,000 value difference. Well, if 20% of the cows fail to conceive in the production cycle and they get sold as an open cull cow, we lost $1,000 on 20 cows, and that value evaporates, right?
Right.
And what you see that manifest as is increased costs associated with bringing in replacement females to the operation. So normally that's bred heifers or something like that. It could be bred cows depending on how you structure the operation, but that's our second biggest cost of production, believe it or not. Our second biggest variable cost of production is really the loss in equity in the cow herd in the production cycle that we have to account for. It's kind of like if I had a factory and every year 20% of the factory burned to the ground and I had to rebuild it. It makes sense that it's a substantial cost.
Right.
And that's really what happens in cows. It's a substantial cost. And it either is the purchase cost of bred replacement heifers, or it's the not selling weaned heifer calves and then all of the development costs associated with those. But it's a really substantial cost. So I'm getting kind of long-winded, but it's a podcast. so when you've got a cow that conceives to calve, let's say on day 60 of the calving season instead of day 1 of the calving season, well, that we're tied to forage, and you and I were talking about this before we started. We're tied to forage in beef cattle systems. We're tied to seasons. So if I want a calve on September 1st, and 30 days after that is roughly October 1st, and 60 days after that was roughly November 1st, well, that cow that conceives to calve on November 1st, the next breeding season, if calving started around September 1st, starts in December.
Oh.
And so that cow that calves in November has a really short amount of time before the next breeding season starts. And we're up against this biological thing called postpartum anestrus, which is when that cow is not having normal cycles after calving. If she calves and she's only got about 20 days until the next calving season starts, there's almost no chance that she's cycling and ready to conceive early in that next season. So that means that later conceiving, later calving cow doesn't just get to become an early conceiving, early calving cow next year. So you get these animals that kind of are in this vicious cycle of stuck later in the calving season. And we have an opportunity to really strategically divest out of those and say, hey, I don't want my $2,000 to live there. I want my $2,000 invested in a cow that's bred to calve early.
Sure, that makes sense. Because, now, a couple of years ago, we were at a field day, and you spoke, and an economist spoke, and she said that the least valuable thing you have on your farm is a heifer.
Well,
because you don't know anything about her yet.
Yeah, I think there's different ways of looking at all of these things. I mean, one thing that is true is a heifer calf is about the lowest value thing you can sell in a lot of auction barns in the state of Missouri, right? I mean, often a heifer calf is significantly back behind a steer calf's value. In some cases, I think we could say maybe they're undervalued relative to their maybe true economic value that they could bring, because we have an opportunity to take that heifer calf and develop her up, and if we can do that economically, turn her into a bred female. And that's the opposite of depreciation. That's appreciation, right? We can increase her value. And there's a lot of operations around the state of Missouri that do just that, whether that's in the Show Me Select Replacement Heifer program, where they develop maybe the bulk of their heifer calves, and then they choose to sell excess bred replacement heifers to other producers. Or there's even producers in that type of a program that they go buy calves, high quality heifer weaned calves, and then they develop those independently, sell all of those heifers as bred heifers. And so there's an opportunity with heifers, I think, is the way that I look at it.
But you still don't know how she's going to be as a mother and such, because I know that day that we were with you doing preg checks, you could tell the bred heifers.
Sure. Well, and
they're a little wilder.
Well, I think you're talking about the day that we were all down at the Southwest Center in Southwest Missouri, and I'm really proud of that research center in Mount Vernon, Missouri, down in the southwest corner of the state, which is really kind of our most active cow-calf and stocker calf location in the state. If you just look at cattle numbers in Missouri, there's a ton of cattle in southwest Missouri. We're a major player in the cattle industry, certainly in that corner of the state. So I at Southwest Center have tried to implement a breeding program and a selection program where we use a lot of reproductive technologies like AI and synchronization. And we also do pregnancy diagnosis with ultrasound. We try to understand when females conceived, and we'll be pretty strict on heifers. We will really only keep heifers that breed to artificial insemination first service, or maybe second service, depending on what the research program is doing that particular year. So that's heifers that are bred to calve. I mean, they don't all calve on the same day, of course. It doesn't work like that. There's biological variation. But if you kept a set of heifers that were all bred fixed time AI, in theory, that's a one-day calving season, right? They're all going to calve early. Or if they are bred over 2 cycles, maybe it's just in 21 days. If we breed timed AI and then breed a repeat service. So we've really kept the bar high at that research center to only keep heifer calves that conceive early. So there's kind of this philosophical discussion there. Well, are we making really good genetics by doing that and by having a really high bar? And I actually don't know that we are. Those are kind of lowly heritable traits, so it's really hard to know when you have an early conceiving heifer that means she has amazing genetic merit for conceiving early. Could just be a little bit of randomness. It could be management. There's less fertile heifers that will also just randomly conceive early, right? So we're up against odds.
But if you start late, if that first time she's bred is 60 days after everybody else, she's going to be behind the rest of her life.
And really, it doesn't matter so much about genetics for commercial cattle from that perspective, right? Because, let's say even hypothetically that she was an elite genetic animal for whatever traits we care about. Well, if she conceives to calve 60 days into the calving season, and then I'm going to ask that first calf heifer, which is the hardest year of her life, to breed back, in just a short amount of time, because that next breeding season is starting right away, she's not going to do it. A high percentage of them aren't going to do it. And basically that means we took these, $2,000 or $2,500 bred heifers and we turned them into $1,000 cull cows, right? Yeah. And so that's a major cost of production, let alone the fact that they'll wean the sorriest, youngest calf in the group.
Yeah. Their first time.
Yeah.
I remember you telling some high school students at a career development day how by synchronizing this correctly in her lifetime, she can produce one more calf.
Yeah, that's what the data really shows. There's a nice research study out of the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center up in Clay Center, Nebraska, and then also some commercial herds out of South Dakota, where they looked at just that question. When a heifer has her very first calf early in the her first calving season versus later, what are the implications just of that for her lifelong productivity? And she'll wean 1.2 more calves if she conceives early and calves early like that. And again, that's not genetics. Genetic merit definitely matters. We want cattle that have good merit for calf weaning weights and things like that, however we define that. but that's just how we set them up in the management system. So synchronization really can be helpful. And then also pregnancy diagnosis is really helpful, because even if we don't use synchronization, even if it's just a natural service bull exposure, we can still go in with pregnancy diagnosis and identify those heifers that didn't conceive early, and those are the ones to sell, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So our take for the drought this year, the low forage, is this is a great time to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think so, and I think there's also a case to be made for really being pretty harsh on cows this year and trying to go into the winter with about as small of a herd as you can stomach. Yeah, or as they have the forage to stomach, maybe is one way to say it, right? And one way to do that is, well, I'm going to redeploy that equity in a next spring or something and bring in new females into the herd next spring when I actually have the grass for it. Maybe another way to do it is I'm going to develop some heifer calves, and I'm going to keep some heifer calves that are a lower maintenance requirement animal. We don't have to. They're not going to eat the same forage volume as mature cows. If we're talking about fall calving cows, a fall calving cow is a lactating animal in the winter, so she's eating a lot in terms of quantity, and then also has some supplementation requirements. In most production contexts, she's going to require some kind of supplementation. If we are developing heifers, maybe we've serviced them, to breed in that December kind of range. Well, they're still kind of functionally an early gestation, first trimester type of animal for most of the winter. That's about their lowest requirements that they'll have. And so it's a stocker calf that kind of happens to be bred. We don't want to starve her because that can have some negative implications, but it's a lot easier to meet her requirements than it is a lactating cow.
So this does bring some opportunities.
It does. And I don't think drought is, none of us like to have drought because it reduces the amount of money we're going to make, right? We're going to have fewer animals. We're going to sell fewer calves a year from now, no doubt about it. But it does create an opportunity to really tighten up some things that maybe in more abundant forage years, maybe unfortunately we've let ourselves get a little lax on. But we can also take the same philosophy and apply it in the good years as well, and we'll make more money, right? We really will if we're choosing to divest out of low gross margin animals, low productivity animals, and redeploy that in a higher gross margin animal.
Good rule of thumb, we should just really consider getting rid of her.
Actually, I don't know about that. There's different schools of thought on that, and I should give some credit to maybe some of the big thought leaders in this space. There's folks like the late Bud Williams, who's a legendary figure and thought leader in animal handling. He also had a lot of ideas about cattle marketing, and he was a big proponent of this idea that we ought to sell cows by a certain age because we do have age-related decline in cow value as well. So he would talk about maybe year 5, year 6 as being the time to sell.
I was thinking 9 or 10.
Yeah, and his philosophy was more, well, we've appreciated her value up, so we've taken again, we'll just use round numbers, $1,000 heifer calf and turned it into a $2,500 bred heifer. And, if you go to year 5 or 6, that bred cow is still probably worth a couple $1,000. But you go to year 7, 8, 9, 10, that the value of that animal, even if she's bred, starts going down just because she's older. And so his argument is, well, you've sort of made a lot of paper profits in the appreciation of those females from a weaned heifer calf to some sort of pregnant female status. But if you never sell her, you never harvest that additional value that's been created. Right. And so it's kind of like different than a pickup, right? But you think about a pickup, you go buy a pickup truck and let's say now you spend what? You spend $80,000 to go buy a good diesel pickup or something. But
you have seen my truck.
Well, mine is not one of those either, but let's say you go spend a lot of money. Let's just for the sake of argument say you spend $50,000. We'll try to keep the numbers easy. Well, you spend $50,000 on a pickup, and then you've owned that pickup 5 years and it's worth $20,000. Well, that $30,000 difference is depreciation, right? Well, if you can imagine that maybe we had an opportunity to sell that pickup at just a year or two into having the pickup and we incur far less depreciation. Yes. People play that game with pickups and other vehicles, right? They sure do. And it doesn't work quite the same way in pickups as it does in cattle, but that is a little bit of the idea, is maybe we can harvest them before not harvest them, but harvest the value that we've created out of them before they've fully depreciated down and just become an open cold cow.
Because some folks would be interested in having this 5-year-old prime specimen,
absolutely,
to build their herd up,
absolutely,
with genetics. So, but they're going to the ones that they're going to take the big depreciations now.
Well, maybe so. I mean,
I think for 5 years, and then they'll be cold cows.
Well, and I will say this: I think there's ways to make money at all of these points. There's not like a one-size-fits-all recipe. You certainly could own cows until they're open cows, and if you can make money the entire way, then far be it for me to tell you to do otherwise, right? Because just like with a pickup truck, I could also go buy a beat to heck $5,000 pickup truck that has 300,000 miles on it, and limp it along with maintenance and repair costs and things like that, and maybe have a lower cost to own pickup that way too. So there's different ways to play the game, and there's not necessarily a one size fits all.
But then you're gonna have a motley crew of 90 Day probably.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, it just brings different logistics challenges. But I do think an underexplored business model for Missouri cattle producers is to turn cows a little bit faster, not necessarily based on their age, but certainly based on their pregnancy status. So here's a weird way to think about it, but maybe we often go into a set of cows, and when we're facing one of these drought kind of situations, we go, well, I'm going to sell off all the old cows or something like that. I wouldn't be afraid to sell some young cows if those young cows have conceived to calve late in the calving season, because they're going to do less for me. Right. And likewise, I wouldn't be afraid personally to own some older cows either, if those cows are continuing to conceive early and calve early. Right. I mean, those can be really productive cows that have pretty low requirements. They're fully developed cows. They're not that
and they're probably already depreciated out.
Yeah, in some cases that can be true as well. If you have a 15-year-old cow, there's not that much difference in her value whether she's bred or she's open, and so you could make an argument for maintaining that cow into production until she does become open, just because most of the depreciation has already been incurred.
Right.
Yeah.